All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Good morning, everyone. Just first, I know there was some confusion on the rooms, so if you are looking for the unit testing session, I believe that's been moved to, I believe, 10A, the room this was originally scheduled for. But hopefully everyone is here to talk, to listen and talk about LightSwitch this morning. So if you are looking for that one, feel free to get up and go. I'm not going to be offended, but with that, let's dive in and get started. My name is Jay Schmelzer. I'm a director of program management on the Visual Studio team at Microsoft. My team really looks after a fairly broad set of the Visual Studio product. We really are asked to own and design a lot of the experiences in Visual Studio for building business applications. So applications that really focus around data, business logic, and those kinds of things. This morning, we're going to talk exclusively about the LightSwitch product, the newest member of the Visual Studio family. Just so I can kind of get a sense of everyone's sort of experience and familiarity, maybe we'll do a quick little exercise here. How many folks are building applications using LightSwitch today? Just a quick show of hands. Okay. Let's ask the opposite question, and it's okay. How many folks really don't have any idea what LightSwitch is really about? All right. So here's what we're going to do. I will do a quick set of just context setting around what is LightSwitch, right? And then we'll try to move very quickly into some of the more, well, as you'll see, it's kind of hard for me to say with a straight face, advanced aspects of LightSwitch, but more of the deeper capabilities and really focus on a lot of what is new with the Visual Studio 2012 version of LightSwitch, as well as the HTML client update that we've recently announced. So that'll be the majority of the talk, but just so everybody's kind of together, we'll start with some basic context setting. Now, when we first announced and launched LightSwitch about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, or I guess a little less than a year ago, we actually released it, we referred to LightSwitch as the easiest way to build line of business applications for the desktop and the cloud. And the reason we felt that was what we wanted to do was create an experience inside of Visual Studio for rapidly creating core line of business applications. My team went out, we spent a lot of time looking at the kinds of applications people are building in the business world, in the enterprise. And we realized that for a class of these applications, a set of them, you were spending, as developers, a lot of time implementing the same thing over and over and over again. And so what we wanted to do was create an experience where the tool would take a lot of that work and do it on your behalf, allowing you to focus on what was truly unique about your application, the business logic, the things that caused you to create a custom application. I accidentally, early on in the LightSwitch development cycle, coined a phrase that with LightSwitch, the only code you write is the code only you could write. Right? It's the stuff that's unique to your rules, the things that as a tool developer or a framework developer, I wouldn't know that you wanted to implement that logic. So it's what you would actually need to go do, your rules, your custom logic. That's what we're striving for with this product. It's not for everything, right? I'll be the first one to say that. You're not going to use this for every application. But as developers, I think it is important for us to be aware of the various tools we have available, and then be able to choose what makes sense for which area. One of the things I will say about LightSwitch is that we test this product, and we test the applications that you can build with this product at very large scale. So in terms of scale of the applications you create, I don't have a lot of concerns about LightSwitch's ability to scale to the needs you have. We test with hundreds of tables in the database, millions of rows, right? Hundreds of screens. Like the applications we run through our stress tests are that big. Now, I will also tell you that the experience of building an application that big today in LightSwitch isn't the best. So this experience is much more tailored to more moderate-sized applications. 50 to 100 tables, 50 to 75 screens, those kinds of things. Teams of 5 to 10 people, right? You go beyond that, you start feeling some pain points in the developer experience that we'll keep working on over time. But that I just want to be clear up front that that's kind of where we're thinking about it. But as far as the application growing and scaling, that is a core design point for us. We want to make sure that if you start in LightSwitch, If the application grows, the needs grow, it's there for you and you can keep going. So that's what we set out to do. And I said that's what we described it as initially. What we're going to talk about today are some changes that I think actually allow us to say that really now LightSwitch is the simplest way to create a modern business application for the enterprise. So we'll see how we've taken a look at trends that are happening today in the industry and applied capabilities inside of LightSwitch to meet those needs. So when we get into talking about the HTML client, you'll see how we've acknowledged that you don't necessarily control every device that your applications are running on anymore, right? You have customers coming to you asking you for their business applications to run on an iPad or an iPhone. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a tool that allowed you to quickly create that application and get it out there for them, right, without having to go and jump between a bunch of different tool sets and be able to do those things within Visual Studio. Those are some of the things we were looking to do. Now, given how much we want to accomplish here and how much I want to go through, I thought rather than going through a lot of slides, what we'd actually do is just spend the rest of our time in the product itself and go through a set of demos and build up some applications. Is that okay with everybody? Hopefully it'll help everybody keep awake early in the morning. I know it'll help me keep awake earlier in the morning. Now, we have a nice sized group here, so if you have questions, feel free to throw your hand up, and I'll try to grab them as we go along. We do have a lot of content, but we should be able to take some questions in between, or if I don't see your hand, you can yell at me, and I'll stop, and we'll take those questions as well. Okay, with that, let's switch over and get right into the product. So this is Visual Studio 2012, the release candidate. I'm running the professional version of Visual Studio. Everything I'm going to show you is available in Professional, Premium, and Ultimate. I just decided to start at the professional version for these demos. As the context setting, for those of you that aren't familiar with LightSwitch, let's start out with, well, the LightSwitch version of Hello World. And trust me, it's a lot more interesting than just a message box with a button on it. So let's get in. Let's get started. You see that what you will see is I've already got the HTML client preview installed. So you see I have 2 new project templates that are showing up that aren't in the core release candidate of the product. But what we'll do is we'll choose the application type. The only question we ask you up front is what programming language are you going to want to use when you do get into writing code. And we support both Visual Basic and C#. For the purpose of today's demo, let's go ahead and just use Visual Basic. And now LightSwitch is going to go off. It's going to create the core project structure for me. What's going on under the covers is we really are creating a model-centric development experience. So as you go through and build up the application, LightSwitch is creating a model of what you've described for us. It's the data entities, the UI screens, and so forth. And then we're going to use that to generate the application and the code for you that is actually going to run and let you interact with it. Now, these business applications, they're all about the data, right? That's really at the core. It's data is a core piece of that. So that's what we try to start the experience with. And we give you the ability to either define new data as part of your application or consume data that already exists in your organization or outside that you want to pull into the application. And we can do both, and I'll show you that. But let's start out with just defining some new data. This takes us into our data definition experience. A simple, really at the core, it's a table designer. And for our case, let's create something like a person. You'll notice that one of the things we do in LightSwitch is we really try to go and follow a set of common conventions that have become popular in the business application space. So you see when I name my business entity person, the table or the collection version of that is already pluralized to be people, right? Now again, I'll be the first to admit this is not perfect. There will be cases where you'll see some strange names get created here. That's fine. You can change it. I can go over here and I can change the name of the plural version of this, right, very easily. But what we did is we took an approach that said, if I called this table 1 and table 1s by default, I was always going to be wrong, right? And you were always going to have to change it. So we're trying to make our best guess at helping you. And sometimes we'll get it right, sometimes we'll get it wrong, but it's just a simple property that you can change. Okay, let's go in and define our person. We'll do something simple. We'll give them a name. It's just a string. Let's give them an email address. And here's where one of the things you'll see that we've introduced with LightSwitch is the concept of a business type. we know that in the business world, there are certain types of data that while they may be stored in a database as a simple data type like a string or an integer or a double, they actually have more meaning than that. So we can give them more semantic meaning by defining these business types. And this is an extension point of the product. You can define your own business types that can be reused across your applications. So in our case, we can say that this is actually an email address. And then it allows us to provide some additional metadata about the type. So in our case, for email address, we can define a default domain name. So if someone didn't put a domain name in, we'll default it. So in my case, I could say, it's Microsoft.com is my default domain name for this application. We could do things like, let's track a cell phone. And here we can see that we have a phone number type. With the phone number, what we did is we also provided the ability to have valid formats for that phone number. So we put a set in by default, and you can add and remove these right through here. Yeah, quick question. So the question is, do the business types also include validation? And actually, yes, that's one of the key benefits that they provide. They actually give us the ability to do two things. We can do custom UI based on the business type, which you'll see in a minute, and we can implement custom validation rules. So in the case of email address, we make sure it follows a something dot com or .net or whatever at blah dot kind of convention. For phone number, we're going to make sure it matches one of the validation strings, one of the format strings that you specify in this dialog. Otherwise, we'll throw a validation error for you. So we can add and remove these. We can reorder them, whatever we wanted to do. Let's do one more thing. Let's say that we have a picture, right? And in this case, we'll just set it to the image type. And we'll make that optional as well. OK, so we've got data. The next thing we need is UI. So let's add a screen to our application. And here's another place where when we were looking at these applications, what we found was that for these core business applications, there's a set of UI patterns that we implement over and over and over again. And so rather than having you start with a blank screen and draw out those UI patterns, we built a pattern-based approach into the product. So you have detail screens. You have screens that are just grids or a list of data, and when you select one, you see the details. Right? Those are just core patterns that we put into the product. We also know that there are sort of multi-screen patterns that you implement a lot. Right? You have a screen where you're first going to go and search for some data. Then you're going to find the thing you want and drill into it, right, to get a detail screen and keep working with it. So we implemented those patterns as well. That's what the search screen does, is it implements that pattern on your behalf. So we can create a search screen. We'll pick the UI pattern we want, and then pick the business type or the data type that we want to use. So people. And again, you see the naming convention thing going on here. If I don't like it, I can completely change it. Let's say we like the word browse, right? We'll say browse people instead, and say OK. So that's going to create that screen for me. These UI patterns, again, it's an extension point of the product. You can define your own UI patterns and plug them in. This is actually a place where some of our third-party component partners are working with us and providing their own set of UI templates that plug into the product that maybe take advantage of some of their individual controls or just implement new and interesting patterns that we didn't do. So we've got a search screen. Let's also go ahead and add a screen to create data since we don't have any yet. Come on. Grab people. Say OK. And now let's just run this and see what we've been able to create with just these simple gestures. Now what's happening here is you see I've left the output window up. What we're actually doing is we're going to create a multi-tier application for you. So in the back end, we've got data we've defined. So we're going to create a SQL Server database for you. In this case, it's actually running as just a local DB instance on the developer machine. We're going to create an entity framework model on top of that to talk to that database for you. We then create a service tier where any business logic we implement will reside. We'll expose that via the OData protocol. And then we have a client application that's going to call that service to present the UI and let the user interact with our application. And what we have right here is the Silverlight application that we've created. So all of that was done for us, and that's the pattern that we've implemented on your behalf. One of the things you notice here, if you've used LightSwitch in the first release, we implemented a new shell and a new theme for the product. So getting it a little bit more modern than what we had in the first release. Both of them are still there. You can switch between them. again, an extension point. You can create your own themes and shells and make this look however you want. So we see that by default we got our browse people here. Let me shrink this a little bit so that everybody can see it. Go to our task, we'll say create person. And maybe we'll create myself. Now you notice that I put in just my first part, it defaulted the rest. If we do phone number, once I have a valid phone number, you see the formatting rules have been applied. This is a place where the business type implemented additional UI too. We have a little editor for the phone number that we implemented. So if you want to go break apart the pieces of a phone number, you can do that a little bit more easily. And then photo, it allows us, this UI implemented even more UI controls where it actually allows us to pick an image and upload it. So we'll pick your picture of myself and upload it. You see we've got indications here that this record has been changed and not saved. A little context for you on myself. Prior to coming to Microsoft, I spent about 10 years doing custom software development in the business world as a consultant. And I have to admit, early on in my career, one of the most common bugs that I myself even had was forgetting to check for data that hadn't been saved when someone goes to close it. So LightSwitch does that, right? We make those little things, right? It's those little things we're making sure we do for you. So, we can say cancel, we can save that, and it's going to now save that record in the database. Let's go create one more person. If I was to go and skip the name, right, which is bolded and indicating it's required, you'd see that we'll get a validation error. So we'll do Beth, one of the members of my team. If you get into LightSwitch development, Beth is somebody you'll become familiar with very quickly. She does a lot of our content and blog posts and how-to videos. So that's Beth. If I go to try to save this, you're going to see I'm going to get a validation error right away, telling me that I've missed a value. We drop that down and we see exactly what it is. Again, this is all customizable. You can customize the way that UI works. We just try to give you a default implementation. So we'll say Beth, messy, move off, validation rules, fired again. So now we got myself and Beth. If I refresh this, you'll see that we've now got a list of the data we want. Now, because we're doing this all templated, we wanted to also give you an experience as the developer to do additional UI customization. And one of the things we found was it's really nice to do that when you have the richness of the actual data available to you. So one of the things that we can do as a developer, we have this link down here when we're running the app that says design screen. If I click that, let me make this a little bigger now, we're going to take that individual screen and we're going to put it into a customization mode with the live data behind it. So maybe one of the things I want to do is say, the image really helps people, so let's move that up in the column ordering. So just by bumping it up, we're seeing it being moved live in the application. If I want to resize some of these things, I can get up here and change the width. I could decide that we just want to remove columns entirely. So if we didn't want email, we can just take it away. So I could just hit delete, and that's going to be gone from my list. If I want to put it back, just choose it and add it back in. When I'm done with this, right, I'll just say save. And those changes are made back into my project, and we're right back in the running application. So it's a simple example, but you get the idea of being able to do this kind of manipulation with the app and with that data available to you. OK. You saw some other common functionality, the ability to do queries in there and search over data. I'll point it out again next time, but if you notice there was an indicator of page numbers in the bottom of that grid. Again, trying to implement best practices just by default for you. We won't go pull all the data down. We'll page it by default. So if you have a big data set, and you'll see that in a minute, we just bring back a page at a time. You can control how big the pages are, all those kinds of things. You can tell us don't do that, bring it all. Just trying to get a good best practice application going. OK, so we saw a little bit how we can create data. Let's also go, and one of the common patterns we see is that people need to use multiple types of data in their application, right? So maybe I'm creating some data, but I'm also pulling some data from an existing application. And I want to relate those two things together and kind of mash them up a little bit. So in this case, what we'll do is let's go add a data source. And just like in the first version, we had the ability to connect to databases. So this is anything we can talk to via the entity framework. So SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, lots of providers out there that you can use. We can talk to SharePoint and SharePoint lists and document libraries and pull that data in. If you're familiar with the WCF RIA service technology, you can implement your own RIA service and plug that in. And new in Visual Studio 2012 is the ability to consume an OData service. So if you aren't familiar with OData, it's an open data protocol, an open protocol for exchanging data. It's very RESTful in nature. So we'll go ahead and we'll say OData. And now we just need to specify the location of our feed. So if I go over here, I have one. There's lots of interesting feeds. One of them that's kind of fun is Netflix has all of their catalog information available as an OData feed. So here's sort of what the initial part of OData looks like. Let's just go grab that URL, come over here and paste that in. You notice that there's a checkbox there. Do you want to be able to edit the data or not? You can edit these things and make them read-write, or you can just do them read-only, whichever you needed to do. So we can go through here, and we can choose everything if we want, and say Finish. And LightSwitch is going to go through, and there's a few things in the Netflix feed that we don't currently understand. So we're just giving you a warning that we're not going to kind of ignore those. But most of them are not a big deal. But we'll keep enhancing that over time. So if I go in, you see that we've gone and we've found all of the various entities and the relationships between them as defined by the Netflix data model via OData, and we've created that. Now what's neat here is we looked at all the data types, and you see that they're coming back as their basic data types. But some of these things, we can decide, interesting stuff like, do we want to be able to search over these fields? Maybe it's not interesting to search over some of these. We can look at things like the URL, and here's a great example where URL is stored as a string. But I know a URL is really a URL. It's a web address. So in LightSwitch, we implemented the web address business type, and I can go annotate that data feed on the LightSwitch side and give us more meaning to it. And now you'll see that URL is going to show up as a link and allow me to click on it and go navigate in. So we'll go through. We can keep doing something. We can take some of these things, for example, and at the data model level, decide that modified dates aren't interesting for our customer to see, so let's just turn those off. What other kind of fun things can I do in here? We'll turn off a few more as searchable. Here's another URL that maybe we want, so let's go make that web address. Maybe the Netflix ID isn't searchable and isn't interesting to see. Those kinds of things, right? So we'll turn that off. And let's just turn off the tiny URL as well. Oops. OK. And then the other relationship. So we've seen how we can go and modify and do additional annotations on top of an existing data source. Let's go into our client again, add a screen. Let's do another search screen for this one. We'll choose our titles, our Netflix titles, say OK. Now we've got the titles screen, and we'll run that. I'll come back and we'll spend some more time in that screen designer here in a little bit. Right now, let's just go launch our application. So we're going to browse our people by default. Let's go search titles. And now you see we're going to go query the Netflix feed. So we're going out over the web, pulling back all the data from Netflix. And you see here's where paging is really kicked in, right? We've got multiple pages of data. So we've got about 5 pages of data from Netflix. We can scroll through here. Anybody want to pick? Let's go meet Joe Black. Why not? Click that. We're taken right to the Netflix sign-in area. Let's go find, I think there's a URL that actually doesn't take me to that. Let's go back over here. Let's try a different one. Maybe not. I guess they all take me to that. Anyway, you get the idea. So we can link in. If I signed in with my next Netflix account, we could go see all the interesting information. And actually get right into watching it right away if we wanted to. Yeah? Great question. So the question was, how do we handle changes to the data source itself, right, that you've attached to, which, Netflix updates the names or, adds a new entity and things like that? Well, what we do is the LightSwitch customer would come in, you can right-click, and you can say Update Data Source. And what we'll do is we'll go back out and we'll query the data source again, and this UI will show you what's different. It'll remember what you had selected or deselected, and then show you what's new or available. And you can just go in and choose what you want to do. If names have changed, we're pretty good at figuring that out and just flowing it through the model for you and getting those defaults. There's some places that we're still working on finding the right balance between doing things automatically and having the developer jump in. For the most part, though, if you start customizing a screen, we're going to leave it alone and let you drag new data elements onto it because we figured you want to own it. If you just took everything that was there are cases where we'll just add them for you. We'll add new fields for you because it looks like you never touched it. So Anyway, that's a balancing act for us. So a great place for feedback to us if you're finding that you do or don't like those. Interact with us on the blogs, on the forums, those kind of things, and let us know. So that's kind of how that works. Now, one of the things I probably want to do, though, is actually create a relationship between these data sources. So let's say I want to track favorites for, favorite movies for a person. So what we'll do is we can go back into our data source here. We'll add a new table, and we'll call it favorite. And what we want to do is we're going to go and all we need here is the relationship to define. So we're going to add a relationship, and we're going to say there's a relationship between favorite and person. And you see here that we can do the cardinality of the relationship. So we can say, a favorite must have a person, and a person can have many favorites. Yep, that's a typical one-to-many. That makes sense. So we'll do that, and you'll see the relationship gets drawn in here. Let's add another relationship between favorite and title from the Netflix feed. And in this case, we don't have any other values for favorite on our side, so we're just going to let it auto-generate a value for us, a key value. But again, letting that relationship happen. If we had existing relationships, like if we were creating something where we knew that we had a field on our side that matched the other one, we'd just specify what the relating fields are, right? So, and let LightSwitch take care of it. And now you see we have a relationship across. You see they're drawn differently. The one inside the data source is a solid line, meaning we can do transactions across it. We can do all those kind of fun things. The dotted line says it's more of a virtual relationship, right? We're not going to try to do transactions across those things if you update both. Matter of fact, by default, LightSwitch won't let you make changes to two data sources on a single screen. By default, we won't let you do that. You can change it as a developer. You can decide that, no, you want to do that, and here's the order, and I'll handle the rollback logic. But that's just the way it works. And so now what I can do is I can go in here, go into my app. We'll add a new screen. Let's add a detail screen for person. Oops, for person. And you see that we look at all the relationships, right, and let you see what other data is available from the core entity you want. So we can do person and favorites. And now if I run this, we'll come in, we'll bring up our people. Select somebody. You see that, there's that task flow, right? By default, search goes right into details, right, when I choose somebody. And now I see I have the information about me and this grid down here that I can start filling in what are my favorite movies. And, this is where we see a default experience. I can go in and pick the title of the movie that I like, right, and it'll get added to me and so forth, and we can just keep building this up. We can go in and we can customize the look and feel of this because it's a little ugly right now. But we can do all of that stuff just within the Visual Studio experience and LightSwitch experience and start relating those things, right? But I'll show you some examples of that later where it's a little more fun. So that's basically Hello World LightSwitch style, right? Creating a CRUD application, we're reading and writing data. We're reading data from multiple sources. We're relating it, getting it up on UI, got navigation structures and stuff like that in place, basic logic and so forth. And I didn't write on my own any code yet, right? Now, there's good and there's mixed feelings about that. I get it. But let's think about it, right? I mean, the code that you would have written at this point is just core boilerplate stuff, right? Loading data in and out of a database, doing those kinds of things. This allows us to do is I can now focus on what's really unique to my application and my core thing, and I get this core thing up and running very quickly. And it's on an architecture that is probably one that I'm familiar with and use myself. So that's what we were trying to do here. Okay, so that's the basics of LightSwitch, and hopefully that gives everybody some context on that. Let's shift gears and get a little bit more sophisticated with this. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this project and switch over to another one I have. If you saw the keynote, Jason's keynote yesterday morning, when Jason did the demos as part of Brad's keynote, he was using this LightSwitch app. And this is part of the project he was using, and we'll create the rest of it as part of this session. Let me just run it. The context behind this is it's a moving company, and this application is used by the folks that schedule the moves, and they schedule consultations for people when they're about to schedule moves. So someone can come out and look at your location and figure out, how many boxes do we need to bring to pack this stuff up? Is there any interesting stuff we should be aware about, like big giant pianos or anything like that? So this is the application they would use in the back end. It's just again, it's a Silverlight-based application. Lots of functionality in here around appointments and customers and so forth. And it's some interesting default logic and rules. So we can do interesting things in here. If we go to a customer, for example, let's go back to our customers. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Let's go search customers. If I choose a customer, I could go create an appointment for them. And let's do a different place. Let's go create an appointment. This screen's better. So in here, this just shows you how if you want to create a screen in LightSwitch that pulls data in, we can go and do stuff like, LightSwitch implements type ahead list boxes or drop-down boxes for you by default. So you see we can go in and we can pick from that just on typing. We can, of course, drop it down and pick people. One of the things this application should have in it is some defaulting logic. So when I pick a move type, we maybe have a template for the types of rooms that are common in residential, and we just auto-populate that data. Those kinds of things. You also see there's some defaulting logic for, the day and time of the move. So we defaulted these appointments and that kind of stuff, and then I can save that. Yeah, question? Yeah, so the question was, what's the behavior in that drop-down list if there's a lot of data? Well, there's two things that happen. First, we have by default, we didn't load any data in there until you actually drop it, right? So that's where the type ahead will actually go out and query, and you saw it actually making a query. So by default, we will only load data when you ask us to. The other thing you can do, we had to strike a balance here. So the other option I have is I can switch from a drop-down to more of a picker UI, right? Where now I can get paging. So if someone really wants to scroll through, we could change this from a drop-down to have the ellipsis buttons, and when I click it, we'd see a little dialog that comes up with the list paged, right? And then you could also feed your own queries in here as well. So lots of fun things you can do. But we do try to defer loading of data until you ask for it. So we don't load all the data in the screen unless the user asked for it or you told us to. So it's a kind of a complex answer because we did put a lot of options in there for you. Okay, so that's sure, we'll save that. So that's sort of the existing application. And we'll go in and if we have time, we'll add more capabilities, and I'll show you how some of that stuff is done. But what I wanted to do is I want to add a new client application to this. Let's say that these people we work with that go out and do the moves, they're independent contractors. They don't work for the company. So they show up with their own kind of devices, right? I don't have any control over them. But I want to have an app that when they're out there, they can go and make quick edits to the details of an appointment, maybe the types of rooms or the types of furniture that are there, right within my app and submit it back to me rather than maybe they're doing it paper-based today. So I need a technology that I feel good is going to run on all those locations, right? Well, one of the things that we've introduced with LightSwitch is wrong spot, is now the ability to add additional clients to your application, and we've introduced the ability to create an HTML-based client as part of this same LightSwitch experience. So I'll just call this mobile client. And we'll go add that to our project. Now, Jason mentioned it before, just so that everybody is aware. As of yesterday evening, this HTML client, there's a preview available. So if you're an MSDN customer, you can go download it right now. And then I believe tomorrow, it's available to everybody. So starting tomorrow, you can go here and follow the link off of the LightSwitch blog and just go download it, and you'll get the experience that I'm about to show you. Actually, honestly, you'll get an even better experience than what I'm going to show you because I'm a few days old in my build compared to the one. I know. Usually I'm the opposite. Usually I'm showing you even more recent stuff, but this time, the flight time thing. So anyhow, so now you see we've got two applications here, a desktop client and a mobile client. And by default, we're wired up to the same set of data services that we'd already created. So I can go start using any of the data, any of the queries and that kind of stuff that I had in my original service from this new application. So what I want to do is I'm going to create an application that we want to have run on a mobile device, and it's for our consultant people, right? So what I want to do is I want to show them by default a list of upcoming appointments. I don't have that. I don't really have that yet. So let's first go create a new query for this. So this is something that's just core part of LightSwitch, the ability to go add additional types of queries. So in our case, we're going to go create a upcoming appointments query off of the appointments type. And what we'll do is we'll just sort this based on the start date of the appointment in ascending order. So that's just going to give me a sorted list of appointments. But maybe I don't want all of them. Let's just get a few of them, right? So maybe I only want 10 or 15, the next 10 or 15 appointments to actually show up in here. Well, how do I do that? Unfortunately, the query modeler doesn't have the capability of doing some of those things quite yet. But what I can do is just drop into code and now compose a query that contains modeled elements, so they're sorting, and my own code that I write just in the form of a link query. So I just come in here and say, query equals from appointment in the source query, where, let's filter it so that we only get things that are in the future. I don't want any past appointments that may be staying around. So we'll say where appointment start date is greater than or equal to day. And then let's just take 15, right? So now we've got a query that's going to return us only the first 15 appointments that are in the future. Now I'm doing this in Visual Basic. Obviously, it's just a link query, right? So if you're a C# person, same thing. You can use the extension methods, you can use lambdas, you can use all that capability. It's just .NET code. It's just link that we're writing, right? Nothing unique here. It's already existing stuff. So we've got that. Let's go back over here to our application. Let's create a new screen. You'll see we have the same approach, the same pattern-based approach. Now this is just a preview, so we're not done, right? We don't have all the screen templates in here yet and stuff like that. We're just starting. But you see the same core idea. So let's go get the browse screen. We'll choose our upcoming appointments query as the source of that screen. We'll give it a different name. It's a little shorter. We'll call it home. And we'll say OK. And now we'll run this. And you'll see that it's by default, it's set that new client as the startup. So let me say run. Let's see what we got. So here we go. Here we have a list of appointments showing up in an HTML-based client that we can work with. All right? And it is just HTML. One of the things we can do is we can come over here into use all of the tools for HTML and JavaScript that are in Visual Studio 2012 for working with this. So we can go look at, use things like the DOM Explorer, and if I want us to go see where an individual value is coming from, I can just click on it and select it. And one of the things I'll point out is, my team, I mentioned, we do a lot of tooling work for other things like SharePoint and Office and Azure. And one of the things that we decided was very core to the experience for this HTML client was we wanted the HTML we created to be human readable. Because I expect you're going to want to interact with this and do things. So if I look at this, it's pretty, sure, there's probably a few more divs in here than you would have done on your own. And that's just an artifact of a tooling needing it to be nice and structured so we can work with it. But really, it's a div. It's in this case, it's a paragraph, right? It's list items. It's unordered lists. It's sorted lists. It's just standard HTML, right, that is readable and is workable and is usable as a human being, not like some other generated stuff that I've seen. So that's the idea here. OK. So really basic. Let's go add a little more detail. We want to add the ability for someone to go and kind of click in and see the details. Yes? So the question is, how valid is how do we validate the HTML? What kind of things do we do? What we're actually building here, this client is actually a jQuery mobile-based client. We leverage jQuery mobile as part of our tool set for building this HTML client. So we're doing a lot of work via them. So that's a lot of what you saw there is just jQuery mobile artifacts that are being created. And then, yes, we are trying to be compliant with the HTML that we're doing. So you can use the tools to keep us honest as well, right? And see what we've done. But we are targeting more modern browsers and mobile browsers as part of what we're building here. OK? All right. So we saw the list. Let's add the ability to tap on something and drill in and see some details for it. So to do that, we'll go add another screen here. Let's pick a detail screen. And we'll pick appointment. And just like you saw in the other application, you see the ability to go in and choose what other related fields do we want to see. So we'll go and do that. By the way, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the default, and then I'm going to show you, in this case, how to get in and really start customizing this, right? And really show you that it's just HTML and JavaScript stuff on the client if you want to. And we'll do the same on the server piece. OK, so now we've got a detail screen. Let's go add one more. Let's add one for rooms. So we'll pick the room, and we'll show room and inventory items there. And now I need to connect these up. One of the things we wanted to do, just to make this experience a little bit easier, was to go and give you the ability, home screen in the designer, to kind of hook some things up without having to go in and write code. So on a touch device, there's a number of actions that are pretty common, like tap, right? That's one. There's others like swipe and things like that that you can imagine we've got a whole section for it. We'll add more of them, right? We just have the one right now. So I say, what do we want to do on the tap action? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up another screen. So let's show the appointment detail, and then just tell us how to hook it up. So we want to pass in, the selected appointment into that screen. If I go into appointment detail and go to the rooms list here, I can do the same thing. I can set up a tap action so that when someone taps on a room, we see the detail for that room. So we'll say take the rooms dot selected item. OK. Now let's run that. And we'll see that we can now get a piece of UI or an application that's going to allow me to go see an appointment, click on it, see the details, click on a room, and see the details of that. So appointments come up, choose this one. There's all the details, right? Tab sort of UI for here's the photos. There's an example where the name wasn't quite right. Pick on a room, tap on that, and I can see the details of that. I can navigate my way back out, all the way back to the list. I can go to the home right away if I wanted to. All those kind of affordances. So trying to get familiar UI patterns just built into the product. You don't see we don't have transitions in there yet. It's an early preview of where we're going with this. OK, so that's the core experience. Let's go work with this a little bit more. One of the things I might want to do is customize that detail screen a little bit. I don't want this big flat list of stuff. Let's make it look a little bit nicer. So what I can do is I can go in using this designer. I guess I should take a moment here and explain what we're looking at here. We try to follow these patterns, these best practice patterns all the way through. So in the UI, we chose to go with view model patterns. So really what you're looking at in this designer is this is really your view model, right? And then this is just sort of the content tree for how it's going to fit into the template. It's important as you're writing code and things like that, you see what the view model elements are you can interact with. So you don't have to go to an individual control to get a value. You can go to the view model, right? And have those nice separation of concerns. So in this UI, let me do just a simple thing here. Let's go add a couple layout items. We'll add a couple column groups here. So we'll do one column there. Let's do one more. Second one there. And now I can start choosing, what things might I want to see in these column groups. So in the first one, let's go add a rows layout to this. So we'll add one more group. And in here, let's go grab, like the street, the city, the state, and the postal code. Let's do a second kind of rows layout. So add a new item here. And in there, maybe we'll add the move type. And maybe I want to pull in some other information that's not on the default appointment. So I can go in and choose other screen data. And I can say what I really want to grab is the customer phone number and add that into the screen. Let's do one more. Let's grab their email address too. So we'll say customer.email. OK, and then we've added these new values into that UI. And so now we should have a column layout. Let's get these other ones out of here. We don't need them anymore. OK, so got our columns layout. Let me get this one out. I didn't need that. Let me just run this real quick. Actually, let me change one thing. Change one thing about this columns stuff. So we'll tell it, don't stretch, don't stretch. Let's see how this looks. one of the things you do, and right now this, again, is mainly an artifact of the preview build. You have to tweak some of these min-max settings to get things to look just right. So we'll see how I did. I won't spend too much time going through that yeah, I messed it up. Let's, hold up. We'll do one thing, because that looks really bad. Let's go do a min width of 350. See if that fixes it. No. Oh, I know what I did. I'll do one more tweak. Oh, well, first of all, that's why. Let's let this stretch. This one, if this doesn't work, then you'll just have to trust me and we'll keep moving. Pick it. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. This will still work enough for you to see what I want to show you. So the next thing we want to do is one of the things that's common in these touch applications is that you tap to go see some details, and then usually when you edit it, you're going to tap again and get into a little bit of an editing mode. So one of the things we added here is the ability to create dialogues. And so I can create dialogues within the context of a screen, which means I now have a single transactional unit across all of that work, right? So I can go in and tap and make some changes and come back and save the whole thing as one transaction set. So we have a dialogue. Let's just do a column dialogue here. We'll give it a little bit better descriptive name. So we're going to call this dialogue edit appointment. And then inside of our column layout, we'll just go add a couple rows. So we'll add a new group, add one more new group. And then here, we'll just pick what we want. So maybe what we're going to go edit is the start and end date of the appointment. So let's just go grab start date, drop it in here. End date. Maybe you want to grab the move type. For the rows layout, let's go in and grab, let's do that other screen data thing. So we'll do appointment dot customer dot phone, right? So we can grab the phone number, and we'll grab appointment.customer.email. Okay, so we can edit, a few values here as part of this dialogue if we want. And then last thing we need to do is go create right up here. We're going to go add to this a button. And again, we can wire this up. So say what I really want to do is I want to show a dialogue, and I want to show the edit appointment dialogue on the screen. So there's our button. We'll give it a name. We'll call it edit. And the last thing I'm going to do here is for this guy, let's play with some options here again. So we'll say the min width is 315. Min height is fine. Do the same thing for these guys. Don't stretch. Don't stretch. 315. Yeah, sorry, let's not have this one. Don't stretch. Don't stretch. Let's try this. Again, this is one of these things that it's a preview build artifact, so we'll do a better job of defaulting these things so you don't have to tweak all this stuff. But let me go in here, choose one of these. You see, okay, my UI is getting better. Say edit, and now I have this edit screen that I can go in and I can change stuff. So let's go change the phone number to 1133. Save that. And you see the phone number is now changed, right? Because it's all part of the same data set in the client, right? And if I save that, now that's going to save it back to my actual database, right? So it's all data bound to the same thing. Yes? So From the dialog experience, we're making better on the desktop as well. Right now it's only the HTML client. Right, but we're working on it for the other one too. Okay, so now what we've seen is how we can go create a bunch of patterns that are common in the UI. We can get in and we can do editing. We can do read and write operations from this HTML client and make it all part of a single transaction and logical unit work like you would expect, right? And so we've done all that. Again, just using the template and features. We haven't had to go in and start writing HTML and JavaScript and those kind of things yet. We've got ourselves up and running with a starting place. All right, I know one of the probably next things you're saying is that UI is not great. How do I want to make it a little more interesting. I want to get my own customization stuff in it. Heck, maybe one of the things I want to do is, I look at my list of upcoming appointments and that's not the most helpful information for me to see in that list, right? Probably want a little more detail of what actually is going on in there. So let's start there. Actually, maybe, heck, even a logo I want to change. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, now this is also a place where, again, preview build. So we're working on these experiences. You're going to see me jump back and forth between some things. That's just the state of where we are with development. By default, we look at a logical view of the application. If I want to, I can go to the file view, and now I see what actual projects really exist in the Visual Studio world. And you see that I have 4 projects in this case. One for my server, which is the service, one for my desktop client, one for my mobile client, and this one in the middle called common, that is code that can execute on both the client and the server. If I look at the client, one of the things we've done, let me collapse some of these things down so you can see a little better, is we've tried to make these client projects just look like standard HTML, JavaScript projects in Visual Studio. So you see we have a content folder, a scripts folder, and so forth, and we put all the things underneath that. That means that we're also going to be able to work with things like the NuGet package manager to pull in HTML and JavaScript extensions right into your project if you want to, right? So you can go out there and you can use those kind of tools, a familiar experience for a Visual Studio developer. So one of the things I might want to do, so if I look at the content and the images, we see I have this logo here. So today, let me add an existing item, go into my demo folder up here, and grab a different logo. Now, again, we'll have a better experience for this than having to name it logo.png, but we'll have the ability for you to pick a logo. But today, I just put a new logo in there, and that's going to actually show up. So if I run it again real quick, you'll see that I'm going to get a different logo now in my HTML app. I'm not showing you the experience we intend to ship. I'm just showing you the customization capabilities we intend to provide. So we should see that, I have my new logo over here. The thing I really want to do is let's change what's actually showing up in this list. So the first thing I'm going to do is on my home screen, let's go back to the logical view. On the home screen, we're going to change this and say for the appointment, rather than showing the summary, let's show a custom control. And now, with the custom control, I can go in and I can just take over the render event and write the code that I want to actually go and implement the logic here. So I can just go write some JavaScript to actually make this work. So I can go in here and do something like, var item template equals, right? So I can just start building up dynamically the JavaScript I want. So let's do var title equals, let's do something like, give it a little bit of a header. And we're passed in the content that is coming through here. So we'll say, content item.value.customer.firstname plus. Oops. Okay, and then let's do maybe a subtitle that is going to show us the start date, maybe for the appointment. So we'll say content item.value.start date. And then we'll just start appending these things together. So we'll say title.append to item template. We'll say subtitle.append to item template. And then we'll say item template dot append to the actual element that we were passed in this case. Does that make sense? Anybody see any glaring mistakes that I've made at this point? Or are you just going to let me fail if I made a mistake? So let's run it and let's see what we get. We should now see the list come back with a little more meaningful information in it. So we should see the customer's name, there we go, customer's name and the start date for the appointment. Okay? So that's interesting, but boy, JavaScript by default puts some pretty nasty date formatting in there, doesn't it? So we can clean that up a little bit. And let me also, while I'm in here, clean up our value. So let's do first name and last name as part of that first part. Okay, so we want to go and do a little better formatting. Now, great thing about JavaScript. Yeah, question? Oh, thank you. Perfect. One of the things I mentioned was this is just JavaScript and HTML. It's just jQuery, jQuery mobile, all those technologies I can use. So I can go out and I could find a JavaScript library for maybe better date manipulation. So I could go in and I could use NuGet to do this. In my case, I've got one on my machine already. So I'm going to go over here and switch to the file view. And in my mobile project here, my web project, I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add existing item. And I'm going to go grab this date extensions JavaScript file I have and pull that into my project. So now I got dateextensions.js. We'll go into our default.htm, and we will pull that into the project by adding a script tag in here. So we'll say, type equals text JavaScript, source equals, and then we'll use the little picker here to go pick it out of our scripts, date extensions. Okay. And then we'll close that off. So now we've included this JavaScript that I just happen to maybe find on the web or something like that. I can now come over here, and what that did is it added the ability for me to have this format method now that understands how to format dates a little bit better. And let's just go ahead and run that. Now you see you have a better formatted time with my start date, end date kind of thing, right? Cool. So, and we could go, of course, obviously, if you wanted to make this even more interesting, right? Now that we've got it shorter, we could go and add, things like this and say, content item.value.end date. And date dot format our right, and so now we'd get the start and end date as part of the values coming back to us. Okay, so that's interesting. But next thing I want to do is, man, that list has got a big bar going all the way across it, right? Probably not the best use of screen real estate, especially when I think about mobile devices, right? The mobile devices, one of the challenges we have there is there's a lot of different viewport sizes in a mobile device, right? You have a slate device that could be sort of sitting in the landscape mode. You can turn it like this, and now it's in portrait mode. You grab a phone, and boy, that portrait mode just kind of shrunk down to like yay big, right? It'd be nice if I could create some UI that just adapted to that better. This is something we're going to invest in the product for you, but let me show you right now how we can go interact with that a little bit on our own, just with standard CSS and JavaScript. So let's go over here. Let's go into our content area. Let's add a new item. Actually, you know what I'm going to do for time? I'm going to add an existing item. I'm going to add a tile list, this thing called tilelist.css. Let me open it up and show you. This is just some Java or some CSS that I cooked up. That's going to go apply a style to an unordered list and a set of list items that give me a little bit more of a block layout rather than this big long kind of bar that we had, right? So that's all we're doing here. We're creating a list style here for an inline block, and then we're having it float. So let me go back to my default.htm. Let's go up here, keep ourselves a little bit organized. So we'll add a link to that style sheet. Type equals text.css, href equals, and we'll pick the tile list.css from our content. Okay, so we've added the style sheet to our project. Now I'm going to go back over here, and at the list level, we're going to go and write some code in what's called the post-render event. So the render event allows us to just take control of everything that's going to be displayed. All we're handed is the raw content. In the post-render event, LightSwitch has already done its application of the UI based on the template, and now you can go do things after the fact, right? So we've already created the UI for the default list, and all I'm going to do is go in here and say, let's go find all the unordered lists in here and apply a new style sheet class to that called tile list, right? And get a different UI style applied to what LightSwitch already generated. Assuming I've got that correct, what we should see is that our list is now going to be a set of block tiles with our data in it. So there we go. We got our block tiles now. And this is going to work a little, oops, get away from the DOM Explorer. It's going to work a little bit better, right? So here's my tablet sitting in the landscape mode. Here's my tablet maybe in the portrait mode. And oh, here's my smartphone style, right? So based on that, we're just use style sheets to go and move things around. As I say, we're looking in the product at giving you some better capabilities so we can do things like this by default for you. Also give you some media query capabilities so you can actually ask us, hey, what viewport size do I have, or what kind of device might I be working on, so you can do your own customization and so forth. And these things should, for the most part, our template should be decent enough that when I drill in, we still get pretty decent scaling and so forth. That's just a layout bug, but you see, for the most part, working on these things. I'll be honest up front with you, the design point for us with the product was that tablet form factor. That's the one we really were designing for right now. But we want to make it usable on the smaller as well. I'm a pretty big believer that the idea of one size fits all for UI isn't going to get you an ideal experience. Those of you that have maybe an iPad, if you run an iPhone app on an iPad, that sucks, right? But it works. So if you're in a pinch, you can do it, and that's the kind of thing. But really, giving you more the ability to create apps for each popular form factor size is really what we were trying to do there. Okay, so that's a quick kind of tour through the HTML piece. Yeah, quick question. Yeah, the question was around, hey, if I'm reusing this service and these entities, maybe I want slightly different views of the entities or the tables based on the client app that I'm working with or the device. Today, that's not something we have. That's certainly something we're looking at in the future. I don't know if it'll make it in the HTML release, the first release, real release or not, but it's certainly something we're looking at. We definitely understand that, yeah, you don't need as much data, so let me trim that down. You can certainly use the queries to filter that way, but yeah, views to filter more this way is something we're looking at. Cool. All right. In the last 10 minutes or so we have, let me switch back to logical view here. Oh, sorry, yeah. Support for globalization and localization. Something we're looking at very hard for this release, yes. Yeah, no, it's not good in the product right now, and that's something we're definitely looking at making easier for you. Yeah, I totally know we missed that one. Support for Oracle databases? Yes, all we need for a database is an entity framework provider, and we know there's a couple of good ones for Oracle. So yeah, as long as you have that provider, we can talk to any Oracle database that we can talk to there. Okay, let me show you a couple other things, sort of back in that spirit of advanced LightSwitch, using air quotes there. So first of all, let's talk about deployment. In Visual Studio 2012, we made a number of enhancements to the deployment capabilities. One of the most specifically was the addition of the ability to deploy just the service. Now that we're creating and exposing the LightSwitch service as an OData feed, we found that actually it's a very productive way for getting an OData service set up and out there. So if you don't like the UI we're generating and you care about that service, and maybe you're going to build your own client, maybe it's a Windows 8 style app, or something like that, you could just use our service and deploy just that. If you're, we still have the ability to deploy to IIS and deploy to Azure. One of the things we've added is the ability to import the settings file that a lot of hosting partners make available via IIS, or that you use with maybe the Azure website. So if you saw Scott Guthrie in the keynote demo, he had that published settings file when he did his website. That you just import right in there, and now you can publish to Azure websites without specifying any more data. I didn't install it yet. For the other side of Azure, the Azure cloud service model, we've synced up with the rest of the Visual Studio tooling, so we have the same publish settings approach and those kinds of things in there. I apologize. I thought I'd already installed it, but I didn't. So let me actually show you the Azure thing real quick. So let me go over to Azure, go over to the portal, and let's just take a look at what this experience might look like for the simple case. So here's the new Azure portal. We'll go into websites. Let's just do a quick create on a website. Let's do LS TechEd demo. And do it in the East region, because that's the one we have right now. Go ahead and create that. This is going to spin up the new lightweight Azure website for me. Once I get it created, we can drill into this. And you see that one of the things I have in here is this published settings file. So if I download this file, I'll just save it to my downloads. OK? I go back over here to LightSwitch, say import settings from my downloads, and say next. You'll see that all the information I need to publish to that has been imported in. And now I can go just continue on with my publishing process. So if I say next here, it's asking me about security. Do I want HTTPS on or off? Is this sensitive data that I'm putting in the cloud? Probably should turn it on. If not, we can turn it off, and those kind of things. Database connections. Yeah, this is a bug. We should have imported that. Oh, no, it's not a bug. I didn't create a database as part of my quick create. Had I created a database as part of my Azure website, that would have been pulled in as well. Here, I just need to go specify my credentials. This is a place also where we're trying to encourage a best practice. You notice I'm asking for 2 sets of credentials. First one is, what do you want the app to use when it's connecting to the database? Second one is, what are the credentials for actually creating the database, the DBA, DBO level credentials? Hopefully, they're different. They don't have to be, but hopefully they are. And by asking you for 2, hopefully we encourage you to think, why did they ask me for 2? Maybe I should have 2, right? But they don't have to. Certificates and so forth. So we can go hit publish, and we would push this up. In my case, to an Azure website. You could do it to your local hosting partner and so forth. So that's the deployment experience. Let's talk about one other thing real quick. And I apologize. I know I'm flying through this stuff, so I'll be around the rest of the week. So come grab me at the booths and stuff like that if you want to talk more. But I just want to make sure that you have a sense of what I can do or what you can do with this. One of the things that we found you need to do a lot is for some of these applications, specifically the more desktop style application, you want to control what's going on in the application based on who's using it, right? Who's logged in. So we have some various authentication mechanisms here. We can have no authentication. We can use Windows-based authentication, Active Directory-based authentication. A new in the 2012 version of the product is the ability to use Active Directory security groups to administer their credentials. We could just allow anybody that's a valid Windows user to come in. So the idea of if I can log into the machine, I can run the app. And of course, we can use forms-based authentication as well. Let's use Windows-based authentication. And let's go switch back to our Silverlight client as a startup. And what I might want to do here is let me show you something that's kind of fun. That's in my home screen. Let's delete the home screen. And let's recreate it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the home screen. I'm going to recreate it. And we're going to use our new query here. So let's go do a search screen. We'll do it on the upcoming appointments. We'll say OK. And so this, by default, is just going to give me that same list of the 15 most recent appointments. What if I want to do it? Let's run it and make sure that works. But what if I want to actually restrict it based on who's logged in? Like, let's only show you your appointments because you're logged into the application, right? Well, now that I've turned authentication on, I can actually make that work. So you see that I'm logged in as JOICH-LS/J. This is going to just bring me back the 15 most recent appointments. Let's go create a query that filters that even more. So what we'll do is create a new appointments query. Let's add a new query. We'll call this appointments for current user. And let's go do, we'll do the same kind of deal. We'll say start date, ascending. But what we'll do is we'll go in and write some additional query code here and say, in this case, what we want the query to be is like equal from appointment in query where appointment.employee equals me.application.user.name. Or actually, do I have a username in here? Yeah, .name. Right? Where? That username. There we go. So we're going to go filter this based on the current user and the current query. Now, the last thing I'll do is I'm going to go back into my upcoming appointments query. And these queries are composable. So right now, it's just going off of the appointments table directly. Let's switch it and say I want to do it off of the other query, right, that I just created. So now I've got an appointments for current user. I've got an upcoming appointments. And those things are going to get composed together to create one query against the database. So we'll do filter by username plus get 15 of them. And that should just now show up in my home screen. So let me run this. And most likely, we'll get no results back because I have a feeling that I don't have any employees with my login on them. I don't. That's fine. Let's go to employees, search employees. Let's pick this first one, edit it, and change this person's username to JOICH-LS/J. Save that. Come back over here, refresh this, and as long as that employee, there we go. Now we've got some appointments, right? Because I just changed myself to be that other employee. Kind of interesting? I'll show you one last thing, and then I'll stop. You may have noticed down here in this properties thing, we also had the ability to create these tokens, right? So maybe one of the things I want to do is say, can create appointment. So one of the approach we took was there's lots of different security techniques people use or ways of controlling the UI of the application. A lot of it has to do with groups. So we have that concept inside of LightSwitch, but we think of it more as that's the way you administer security and access rights for users, right? You put users in a group and you give groups permissions. Well, as a developer, it's awfully nice to just check for a permission. So then if organizational rules change and suddenly a different group can start doing appointments, all you go into the app is give that group those new appointments. You didn't have to change any code, right? So I'm not going to write code that says is in group. I'm going to say has permission is the way I do the coding. So we've got that. Let's go into appointments, and we can go write a piece of code here that actually is going to check when someone tries to insert an appointment. It's just going to say, result equals application.user.hasPermission can create appointment. So we're just going to check if the current user can create an appointment. For speed here, let me go into the UI and show you. So that controls the back end. No matter who calls me, that rule is going to run, and we'll throw an error if they don't have that permission. Let's go into our create new appointment screen. We have the same pattern here. We have a can run method where I can just say result equals application current.user has permission can create appointment, right? And run those things. So if I run this app right now, what we should see is I probably won't even see the ability to create an appointment because that LightSwitch knows to kind of follow that pattern. So I used to have a create appointments menu here. If I drop this down, you see it's not there anymore, right? Let's test that. Great thing we added for developer ease. This was one of those things that when I was doing these apps, it bugged me that I had to go create all these different logins to test all the various permission combinations. Well, I can just turn on and off permissions at a debug session, right, for myself. So now when I go in, now I've granted myself the can create appointment permission, and we should see that menu item come back. Appointments, create new appointment is back, right? So allowing me really easy to go in and test and validate these kinds of things. So with that, hopefully you've seen why I feel I can make a statement that this really is the simplest way to create a modern business application for the enterprise. Again, it's not for everything, right? I'm not trying to say that. I think it's an interesting thing to look at. If you have time this week, find me. There's lots of interesting stories I can tell you about things I've seen our customers doing with this and unique approaches to it. But man, I'm pretty sure everybody's got in their head a class of applications that you've really felt you spent too much time or more time than you wanted to building, and hopefully this tool will help. All these slides are available. Let me go. You've seen all of this stuff, but there's a lot more detail in here about how things are working. Last thing I want to get up for you is just a place where you can find some more information. Boom, boom. So my team has a blog, blogs@msc.com/LightSwitch. We try to make lots of interesting announcements and how-to video kinds of things in there. We have the development center, the forums. You can obviously friend us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, all those kind of fun things. In most cases, if you do that, you'll get to know Beth Massey pretty well. She's who runs all that stuff. So everybody get the picture that they wanted? A few more flashes going. I love it. I'll show it's my age. When I started doing these things and I didn't have as much gray hair, people were frantically scribbling. Now everybody's just like, picture. It's awesome. TechEd resources. And finally, please definitely encourage you to submit an evaluation session. Comments are extremely helpful. Love to know what you liked, didn't like about just sort of the topic, the session, my presentation style, all of those kind of fun things. And with that, I want to thank you for spending some time with me this morning. Hopefully this was interesting. You've been a great audience. I will be around the next few days, so feel free to stop me, grab me, have conversations. If you have additional questions, feel free to come on up. I got to get out of the way, but I'll take some in the break. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great day. Thank you very much.